Welcome back to the Midnight Who Show. Tonight I'm going to be taking a look back at the Doctors from the 1980s. During the later years of Tom Baker, the show started to lose some of the gothic horror themes and instead went towards some weird story ideas. The show still felt familiar because of Tom Baker. He still brought all of the Fourth Doctor humor to the show. However, when the show entered the 80s, the show was feeling less and less like the old Fourth Doctor run. By then, Tom Baker has been in the role for about 7 years, and it really started to show that they were ready to leave. The Fourth Doctor was an incarnation filled with wittiness and a sense that they were the most important thing in the entire world. The Fourth Doctor used their wits to stop the bad guys and villains that they encountered on their adventures. He was very fond of offering jelly babies to anyone that he met. Tom Baker left the role in the 4-part story Legopolis. After 7 years, the Fourth Doctor's run came to an end, and a rocky decade was soon approaching. The Fifth Doctor was played by Peter Davison from 1981 to 1984. Grab your cricket bats, and while you're at it, pin a celery stick to your coat, because it's time to take a look back at the fifth incarnation of the Doctor. The Fifth Doctor era is one of my least favorites of Doctor Who. To me, the show became at times a very confusing nightmare where a person couldn't even understand what was going on. I don't like rewatching some of these stories. The thing that worked the most was actually the interaction between the Doctor and their companions, even if I'm not a huge fan of Tegan, who got a bit on my nerves and was a bit too annoying. It was a real treat to see this Doctor be more of a fatherly figure to them and always treat them with respect. Another thing was how Peter Davison made the Doctor their own, but also hearkened to that of past Doctors. It was probably not easy to follow the legendary scarf-wearing Doctor. Another positive of this era, like the Fourth Doctor, was a nice mix of classic monsters and some new ones. Some problems with this era was that there was no more two-parters, and most of them were only 4 and at times 2 parts. The 2-parters are nice for a quick viewing experience, but didn't leave a good taste sometimes. They weren't the best. I did like Black Orchid, though. Another was the Master, who I felt was very overused in this era, and most of his motives didn't even make sense. I think this is a big difference between when the Master was in the Third Doctor era so much. It just did not work in this one. After 3 seasons in the role as the Doctor, Davison left in the 4-part story Caves of Androzani, which is considered to be the best of the classic era, and I will agree with that. This regeneration story is one of my favorites, because the Doctor fought off death to just save Companion Perry, and it also showed how much the Doctor will do anything for the companions. Grab a glass of carrot juice, because it's time to take a look back at the Sixth Doctor, who was played by Colin Baker from 1984 to 1986. This era gave Doctor Who fans Doctor in Distress, a wonderful piece of music, when the show was placed on an 18-month hiatus. This is also an era with the Doctor with a colorful outfit, increased violence, and the worst regeneration to date, but we'll get to that a little bit later. The Sixth Doctor was very loud and very arrogant, and when he was still in his post-regeneration state, he even attempted to strangle Perry. Oh, must have been so wonderful to the kids who were watching at that time. He's very rude and very brash, harkening back to the First Doctor. He wore a very colorful coat with a lovely cat pin on it. He also hated carrot juice, possibly due to his companion Mel, who gave it to him quite frequently. Most of the Sixth Doctor stories were very violent and much darker than the show used to be. This led to the show being put on a hiatus by the BBC for 18 months, then being brought back for another season. However, this was unfortunately the last one for Colin Baker, because Colin was fired by the BBC and denied even the request to even come back to film their regeneration sequence. The regeneration sequence in Time of the Rani was done by Sylvester McCoy, the new Doctor, in a blonde wig. In the context of the story, the Doctor regenerated because they bumped their head on the TARDIS after they were being hit by a ray by the Rani. The BBC book Spiral Scratch and the Big Finish production The Last Adventure attempted to give their own end to the Sixth Doctor run. The Sixth Doctor is not one of my favorites, mostly because I don't like most of the stories. However, I will say, there's a few highlights. I really enjoy the 2 Doctors, Attack the Cybermen, and even if now we have Big Finish, which has given this Doctor a new, fresh start. In these productions, they're much more mellow, and they have some really great adventures with their companions, new and old. The Seventh Doctor was played by Sylvester McCoy from 1987 to 1989 and made a return in the TV movie in 1996. After the untimely firing of Colin Baker, Sylvester McCoy took over the role from 1987 till the show's cancellation in 1989. This incarnation of the Doctor was a complete 360 from the previous one. There was no grumpier, short-fused, and a jerky Doctor. Instead, this Doctor was more joyful and clownish, harkening back to the era of the Second Doctor. This Doctor was also not afraid to act serious, but it was more to make fun of a person or irritating the enemy. Still, signs of that clownishness were still in these scenes. This era can be sometimes forgettable, as there's not many stories, and most of them were very weak and not very memorable. Each of the 3 seasons for this Doctor had a different feeling to it. The first season of the Doctor was very weird, and Mel always got on my nerves. Time of the Ronnie is a guilty pleasure and does a good job at least introducing this new Doctor. The next season was another alright that started to show the decline of the show. The highlight of the season was Ace as the new companion. The last season showed itself a much more darker tone, but not like the Sixth Doctor era, and had some of my personal favorites of this era. One of the biggest, a memorable part of this era is that it does mark the final appearance of the Brigadier to the show. Not including a certain Cyberman, which we will not talk about. The show was cancelled after the show's 26th season, and the Seventh Doctor's and Ace's adventures were over for television. However, that wasn't the end of their stories. The adventures continued in the Virgin New Adventures book line and the Big Finish audios. After 6 years since the show was cancelled, the show returned for one night in a TV movie which saw the Seventh Doctor regenerate into the Eighth Doctor. The reason behind this regeneration was that the Doctor was accidentally shot after landing in San Francisco in a gang war, and unfortunately, the Doctor did not know Time Lord biology. Well, that's it for tonight. That is my look back at the 80s of Doctor Who, a very rocky decade. There's some good moments, but also some really bad ones. In the next video, we'll be taking a look back at the 8th Doctor era.